Welcome to Mission Oriented, a veteran crowd podcast that showcases veteran talent from both the private and public sectors. Their impact is everywhere. We are here to uncover it. Here's your host, Bob Louthen.
Welcome to the Mission Oriented podcast on the Veteran Crowd Network. I'm your host, Bob Louthen. Well, if you're like me, politics is becoming pretty partisan and ugly. There's not a whole lot of agreement out there on what things should be done, and I feel like we're a nation divided. A lot of calls for reform, and it really depends on which side you're on. We've had folks that want to delegitimize the Supreme Court or change the Electoral College, and it's all driven really by what side of the aisle you might be sitting on, and it's from people that don't like the outcome. Well, we think veterans have a great say in our democracy and how this is going to be fixed. And my guest today is one of the people that's actually doing that. My guest is Eric Bronner. He's the founder of Veterans for Political Innovation. He's a 1997 graduate of the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, a Naval Flight Officer, and has a law degree and other things. One thing, Eric, that the internet never forgets. You've been a guest on my program before, but we did this thing called the lightning round, and I found out that you're a folk singer and songwriter, and something I've never forgotten. You just write 3 chords and the truth. And I just thought that was a great quote. Eric, welcome to the program. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. Thank you very much, Bob. I'm pretty sure I stole that quote. I can't remember from whom, but yeah, that's all you need is 3 chords and the truth. You can get a lot done.
So you became a Naval Flight Officer. It's near and dear to my heart. I have a son out on this Ford right now, doing the same thing in a different aircraft. Tell everybody about going to the Naval Academy and being an NFO before we get into talking about politics.
Sure. So yeah, I had grown up in Wisconsin, received my appointment from Congressman Bronner, who just stopped serving in Congress just a few years ago, and served, as you mentioned, as a Naval Flight Officer in the E-2C Hawkeye, flying on and off of the USS George Washington. And in 2005, decided to get out. We had a young family. My wife is from rural southeastern Missouri. I'm originally from Wisconsin, so St. Louis was a compromised city. And went to law school, practiced law for a minute, and a real estate broker for about 7 minutes, until I had a little bit of awakening about what I really felt called to do and most passionate about.
Yeah, fast forward to 2018. Let's talk about that seminal moment that's kind of gotten us to where we are today.
Yeah, so I was one of those strange kids who grew up watching political conventions from beginning to end. I always thought maybe someday I'll run for office. There was one major problem, though. I had never affiliated or registered with either major political party, which really limits your options in our 2-party system. So in the fall of 2018, I was trying to figure out how to get involved, who's out there that's not partisan or more independent. And I heard a podcast on Freakonomics Radio called America's Hidden Duopoly. And to this day, I mean, it's just an incredible podcast. It was one of those moments where you're grabbing for napkins from your glove box, trying to write down notes. And I was so inspired that I wanted to learn who's doing this work, this innovation, political innovation work in Missouri. And I found Show Me Integrity, got very involved with them as a board leader. And that led to founding Veterans for Political Innovation about 3 years later.
How did you and Todd Connor meet?
So I first met Dan Biga through LinkedIn, and Dan Biga at that time, of course, was working for Bunker Labs. Dan had worked for With Honor, the cross-partisan PAC, before Bunker Labs. Dan introduced me to Todd. Todd, Dan, and I are all politicos, people who are, interested in politics, pretty active, but not in a hyper-partisan way. And when we came together, we had all read this politics industry book. Mm-hmm. And that was really, this is foundational to our mission with Veterans for Political Innovation.
What does the organization, I know you're having some events, but a upcoming events and schedule, but talk a little bit about what's going on now from an event standpoint. And then I want to drill down into, what are the kind of the fundamental tenets of what we're trying to do here. And by the
Sure.
way, as a disclaimer, I am on the Virginia team for Veterans for Political Innovation, folks. So
Yes, thank you very much, Bob. Our mission is nonpartisan. We mobilize veterans from across the country, across the political spectrum, to advocate for the most powerful, achievable election innovations, things that will make politics less toxic and make our government more accountable to all of us, things like ranked choice voting and open primaries. And in support of that, Bob, as you know, we travel around the country doing events and holding rallies and building grassroots momentum around the need for structural innovations. Someone said it's the structural stupidity that's baked into our two-party system that's getting we the people such terrible results. So let's fix the system itself as our first priority, and then go back to arguing about everything else.
this is the mission-oriented podcast on the Veteran Crowd Network. Eric, I want to drill down on the structural stupidity comment now. Let's talk a little bit about primaries and why we think they could be better.
Yes. So let's start with General Washington warning us not to divide ourselves into two private political parties. And he warned us against the baneful effects of partisan, excessive party spirit. And what are
And that certainly exists right now.
Yes, and what are some of the things that fuel that excessive party spirit, where one side is always right and one side is always wrong? It's the structural stupidity of partisan primary elections. This is where we, the people, the taxpayers, say, oh, sure, private political parties, go ahead and use our taxpayer dollars for your selection process, and then decide to exclude anyone who won't register or affiliate with your private political party, which, oh, by the way, that's 50% of military veterans. I'm one of them, are independent voters, not affiliated with either party. And in 10 states, we can't even vote in primary elections. That's a closed primary, that's problematic. And so we're fighting for open primaries where everyone gets to participate regardless of party affiliation.
And so when you have a open primary, are Democrats and Republicans running in the same ballot?
A truly open primary, yes, is all candidates regardless of party running on one ballot. And sometimes I have friends who say, well, I don't want, someone from a different party voting on my candidates. Here's the beautiful thing about an open primary. It is the best antidote to strategic voting. There's certain states, right, where in this cycle, it's been the Democrats spending money to handpick who they think is the weakest Republican opponent in a semi-open primary or a closed primary where you have to pick one side or the other. That happens. That's strategic voting, and we don't like that at all. The way to counteract it is an open primary. You're not going to spend money on your opponent in a race where you are running against them. And that's what an open primary is everyone's on one ballot, everyone's running against everyone regardless of party, and we, the people, get to choose. I could vote for a Republican for governor, a Libertarian for lieutenant governor, a Green Party person for Secretary of State. And that's how it should be, because we are the ones paying for those primary elections.
What are there examples of open primaries in place yet?
Yes, absolutely. So Washington State, California has top 2 open primaries since 2010. Alaska has open primaries now, thanks to a ballot initiative in 2020. Nebraska for some of their elections, and then Louisiana has what's referred to as the jungle primary, which is an open primary that happens on general election day, and then there's a runoff if needed.
Okay, let's talk about the second tenet of what we talk about at Veterans for Political Innovation, and that's the ranked choice voting, and maybe touch on the top 5, but let's more first talk about why ranked choice voting drives the kind of behavior that we're hoping to accomplish.
Right. So I just read a great quote this morning, and sometimes ranked choice voting is called instant runoff voting. That's exactly what it is. It's a ranked choice ballot where the voter goes in and they get to rank, depending on the state, rank their top 4, rank their top 5. And then if no one gets over 50% of the first place rankings, there will be a series of instant runoffs where the bottom candidate drops out and their votes get reallocated until someone has over 50%. So why is this important? It requires someone to win with an actual majority, and it requires candidates to talk to everyone. In about 75 to 80% of our races, the candidates don't even have to talk to anyone from another party because districts are so red or so blue that the low turnout primary is all that matters. So ranked choice voting incentivizes more competition. It gives us more choices, and it will have what I call the Ross Perot effect, where even if a candidate doesn't win, they're going to make a big enough impact where their voting block and the message that is most important to that block of voters will get transferred to the remaining candidates, which is exactly what happened with Ross Perot. Even though he didn't win,
He was the spoiler. He ended up helping Bill Clinton and hurting the Republican candidate.
He did. So if there had been ranked choice voting, most people think that the election actually would have gone.
Bush would have won a second. He would have won a second term.
Probably. Right? I was speaking more to just his ideas of the balanced budget, and him getting 19% of the vote meant that next cycle, both parties adopted a balanced budget as part of their platform because he had such a big impact. And that's something that ranked choice voting will do when you have 4 or 5 candidates competing on a level playing field.
There's so much to unpack here, and but in a limited amount of time. So let's talk quickly about the events that you're planning around the country and what people we're going to hear, and then we'll talk about how to follow Veterans for Political Innovation.
Right. So recently I was in Pennsylvania, where there's bipartisan legislation pending to repeal Pennsylvania's closed primaries. So we're very active there right now. We're coming to DC for a great event. Former Army Secretary Luis Caldera, General George Casey are going to be our guest speakers. And then Nevada is the most important game in town for political reform nerds like me. Why? Because there is a ballot amendment that Nevadans will be voting on November 8th to bring top 5 open primaries and ranked choice voting to Nevada in 2026. So we're very excited to support ballot question 3. If you know anyone in Nevada or anyone listening in Nevada, please vote yes on 3 and tell your friends to do the same. It's going to be the best way for us to combat this toxic tribalism and some of the poisonous partisanship that we see going on in our country.
And we're going to put links to Veterans for Political Innovation in our show notes, but tell everybody how to get in touch with you.
Yeah, the best ways are our website, veteransforpoliticalinnovation.org. It's a mouthful. If that's too hard to remember, just do v-pi.org. And I'm Eric Bronner. You can look me up on LinkedIn. I'd love to have a conversation, tell you why the combination of open primaries and ranked choice voting are the most powerful, achievable reforms in America right now.
Well, this is the Mission-Oriented Podcast on the Veteran Crowd Network. Our guest has been Eric Bronner. Eric, thanks for sharing all this. Good luck with what you're doing with Veterans for Political Innovation.
Thank you very much for having me, Bob. Appreciate it.
Again, this is your host, Bob Loudon. Thank you for listening to the Mission-Oriented Podcast. And again, another shout out here to Eric Bronner. Thanks so much for being on the program. And that's a wrap.
Thank you for listening to Mission Oriented. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and you won't miss an episode. To learn more about Mission Oriented and the Veteran Crowd Network, visit us at www.veterancrowdnetwork.com.